and YouTube fam. We are here today recording live a new episode of Get Free and Fulfilled podcast. I am your host Aramdoy, and this is the beautiful badass queen Eva Choi. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to be here. I'm such a big fan of you.
Oh, I am too. We were just talking right before and got totally distracted. Oh, wait, we need to start. Thank you for the reminder. Welcome to the GFF. And first, I want you just introduce yourself and let us know, what you're about, where you're from, what your cultural background is.
Yeah, my name is Eva Choi. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Chocolate Lab. We're an artisan chocolate facility, and we're located just in the southeast of Calgary, and in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And so, my cultural background is that I'm the child of immigrant parents. My parents are Hong Kong Chinese. And so I grew up in Eastern Canada, just northeast of Maine, in a province called New Brunswick, which is a bilingual province. So I grew up speaking French, English, and Chinese. And part of my transition and my transformation has come from um, being educated and culturally honed to perform for my parents and really not finding fulfillment from that, and trying to straddle being the dutiful daughter but doing exactly what I want and still finding joy. And even into my 20s, 30s, and even my early 40s, I was busy being someone that I thought I was supposed to be, not being authentically and genuinely who I was. And so in I think 2015, I was on mat leave with my third child, and I was given my pink slip upon return to my career. And when my career ended, I was devastated because my entire identity was wrapped up in being an engineer, being associated with a title, a salary, and I didn't know who I was without that. And while my husband was returning to culinary school in chocolatiering, he had the opportunity to start something on his own and asked me if I could support him in this endeavor. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I wasn't actually supporting him properly. I was pointing out all the mistakes and all the things that were going wrong. And it wasn't until I realized that, am I committed to this, or is this just interesting to me, that I could actually get behind him and then begin a journey of developing myself and figuring out who I was as a human being, as a mother, as a woman, as a wife, as an entrepreneur, as a co-founder, as a CEO, and finding my voice, being my genuine, authentic self, but also figuring out where I was within all these systems and creating a new identity for myself, which was imperative in changing my narrative and how I spoke to myself without all of the intergenerational childhood trauma that happens from being a child of immigrant parents, because there's all these expectations and there's this narrative and chatter that happens when things go sour, south, or you hit at a level of adversity. And it wasn't until COVID happened that kind of accelerated my need to actually speak kindly to myself, because there are all these stressors outside of my control. And as we were having this conversation, prior to, us going live, it's like, yeah, that COVID piece is the one that, the thing that exposes all of your extraordinary strengths and all of your vulnerabilities, but it also allows you the space and time to do research and support yourself with information.
Yeah, that is so true with COVID. I think a lot of people can relate with the fact that we were forced to be still all of a sudden. A lot of us did not experience that moment of stillness because we just intentionally distracted ourselves. But all of a sudden, there's no work, you're sort of stuck at home. All of a sudden, you have all this time in your hands. What are you going to do with it? I mean, you can either continue to distract yourself with TV and everything else, or you can sort of use that time to do something constructive, which is starting with self discovery. Now, I want to go back to when you, as an engineer, was that, did you ever feel any connection to that career, or was it really something that you sort of picked up from programming or from the way you were raised?
Um, a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I didn't know I wanted to be an engineer. I really have a love and passion for earth science, and it all started with, a high school teacher who taught physical geography and geology, and he kind of turned me on to, like, rocks and how cool they are and mineralogy, and I was like, oh, is there a career in this? And my parents didn't understand what geology was. And the irony of all this is I graduated with a degree in environmental engineering with a specialization in water and wastewater treatment. And when I graduated from university and arrived in this new big city, there were no environmental jobs, none. So I did what any good geologist does. I started with, I started looking for jobs that interested me, but all the entry level stuff. So I was doing the geological equivalent of flipping burgers, which is called logging core. You use a set of geophysical logs and you have the physical core in front of you, and you're trying to figure out where the changes in rock types are, where the ore zones are, where, the foundations are when it comes to, an open pit mine. And these were things that I'd never really clicked into before, but being able to use, an analytical first principle kind of research and development mindset, as well as understanding, geology, I was able to kind of marry the two. And then I found myself working in consulting. So I was sitting on rigs and doing all sorts of cool stuff like that. But I also discovered geological modeling, which was, dorking out and figuring out where the resource was and reporting numbers to people who voiced these things to their people and had agency in that. And so I got to be part of so many different projects in so many different ways. And then I found myself at the top of, an oil and gas firm, not even a firm, like a real gigantic mega corporation. And so I've never actually worked as an engineer. I've always worked as a resource geologist. So even though I had the title, my DNA and how I was wired was specifically for my passions and love. But it never really occurred to me because I was constantly transitioning and making myself the best in what was in front of me. And it never occurred to me until after the layoff and after that devastation and meltdown that I actually had the skill sets to do these transformations for myself, without the illusion of being governed by an employer. And so when I lost all the boundaries, I got really scared because I'm raised with the expectation of just trying to have some level of comfort, steady income. I didn't want to be a burden to my parents. And, your parents just really, really want you to be self-sufficient, but they also want the accolades of saying my son or daughter does ABC. And I really was worried and panicking about what my parents, my family, my friends would think of me in entrepreneurship. And it wasn't until the last couple of years where I realized that their thoughts of me and their opinions of me actually don't matter. What matters is what I think of myself.
How did you get to that
But
place of realizing that what they think of you really doesn't matter? Because I know, as a child or daughter, especially of immigrants, like I can relate with the immigrant life, being from Senegal, where it's so traditional. We always follow our parents' directions, like to the T. And like there are even grown women and grown men who still this day in their 40s live at home. You don't leave home unless you go to get married. So I understand that. I'm not sure if it's like that, but that's how it is over there. And so there's such a, not just a deep respect, but a deep sort of like yearning to always follow your parents. How did you get to a place where you no longer, I mean, you love your parents, but you no longer, their opinion of you didn't carry so much weight, that you were free enough to do and follow your path?
I think it was the moment where, my mother had run businesses prior to, me having children. And so she has a different entrepreneurial lens that she wears when she's, looking at the world. And, but in running Chinese restaurants versus running a chocolate company, there's strategic things that just kind of don't match, So she's telling me to buy in bulk. And I was like, well, in bulk chocolate, it runs, about $25 a pound, So, we're talking about cabbage that runs, 99 cents a pound. that's in winter when it's really hard to find cabbage. So it's really not comparable. So the advice that she's giving me is great, but I mean, I don't have another $100,000 to just, buy a gigantic flat of chocolate when I'm just opening my business. Um, but it probably wasn't until I had kids and then we were kind of butting heads about, I'm seeing these things in your family and I don't like what I see, or what you're doing is making me uncomfortable and unhappy. And I was just like, wait a second. I'm a grown woman. I am not responsible for your feelings. I'm not responsible for your happiness. Like, I'm accountable to me and the people that I'm leading, which means like my employees and my family. And so, like, parents have this kind of contract with you where they can kind of, peek under the lid and see, oh, these are the things that I see that are going wrong. And when you have a lifetime of that, it adds such a deep layer of insecurity, because you so desperately want to please your family, because you believe that they have, the crystal ball and they see something else in you, and you feel that you have the duty to perform on their behalf. But what they don't tell you to do, the frustration in that is that when you're aiming for goals that aren't within the scope of your happiness and your joy, fulfillment, your, what lights you up, your passion, then it leaves you empty and dark and bitter and angry, because you don't find the sweet spot, the place where everything just kind of works out because you're happy, right? I didn't know what happiness really was. I just knew that it's like a fairy tale, right? Or Snuffleupagus. Everyone kind of talks about Snuffleupagus on Sesame Street, but no one sees him. None of the adults see him, right? And there's a lot of Snuffleupagus moments in in growing up as an immigrant child, right? Like, you behave one way outside of the house, but it's a completely different deal when the doors are closed. Discipline's uptight, sometimes physical, sometimes emotionally and mentally like abusive, but it's the culture. And how that fits in North American society is that it doesn't translate. It's not acceptable. But after years, after decades, like, this is something that you have to break. You have to break free from your own chains of your own attachment to what you consider normal, and start creating the life what the new normal is, and being the parent that you wish you never had. So that was for me the deepest that was the turning point when, like, I'm doing these things. And my mom was like, well, wait, have you considered these things and how I feel? And I'm like, it's not about you. You've had your life, you had your opportunity to make the choices. And now I have my opportunity to make my choices. I love your input. I can really appreciate that you're concerned, but like, I'm the one taking on the risk. So watch me fly. Yeah, just watch me fly. I think I can do this. Where
Amen.
before, in my head, it was just like, can I do this? Like, my mom doesn't think this is possible. Like, and in my head, it was her words, sometimes with my voice. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, the narrative that you have is from the past. So
Yeah,
now I had to create, what was current for
that old
me
story.
and empowering.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. It makes me think of, like, for me, I can relate with that story, but I also think of the times where in the beginning where I decided to stand for myself, towards my parents, and let them know, okay, this is not my path. I'm going to choose my path. And it was, for me, it started with religion. My mom being Catholic, and my dad being Muslim, and me deciding I don't want either. I want spirituality, but I don't want religion. So, but I felt a lot of guilt too with that, meaning, I'm going away from everything that they've taught me. I'm going away from it. Realizing actually now I'm not really going away from it, but I'm finding my own path towards it. But there was guilt in the beginning. Did you feel that? And if so, how did you deal with it? How did you get over that?
Yeah, like, part of the fabric of Chinese culture, especially in raising young women, is guilt and shame. Guilt
Yeah.
and shame cloaked with kindness and love, like, it's just, and it's devastating, right? And it kind of gives you this false sense of, even though you're trying your best and you're doing enough and you're moving the needle, that is not acceptable when it's not up to someone else's random standard of whatever it is that you're working on. And if you look at it through the lens of like life is very long, and if you're making progress in any modality over a long period of time, you're going to get better at all the things. So what did you learn? How do you apply it? And this is where the growth mindset comes in. But when you don't have a growth mindset, or you have, as Tom Bilyeu calls it, the false growth mindset, it's kind of like you let that affect your progress and it holds you back. They become those limiting beliefs. And so it's like, well, if I do this, then, well, what will they say? Or if I do this and it doesn't please them, or where's my extra 5%? I got 95% of the way there. Where's the other 5? And it wasn't until I actually had to stop myself from like, no, that's not the way it's going to go. Like, no, this is what I say to myself. 95%, kick ass, girl. Like, where's your tiara? Where's your cape? You freaking rock that shit, right? Now I can turn around and say, I've done this. I've done this. And when you do a whole bunch of things related to one subject or several subjects, you start building that credibility with yourself, right? And so if you're knocking them out of the park and you're not seeing a whole lot of failure, that actually makes me super paranoid, because I'm like, what's happening here? But if you're able to actually manifest things and execute it at an above average level on many, many different things over time, isn't that what life's about? It's about really mastering what you're really extraordinary at and shoring up where you're really vulnerable, and being okay with the fact that you're not strong everywhere. But who do you partner with? Who do you choose to work in a team with? And what really showed me everything that I needed to know about life was actually being married to the man that I'm married to, which is, my best friend, my, my baby daddy, like, my business partner. He and I share an entire life together of 20 years. And the only thing we have in common is those 20 years together and our children. Like, we're of different religions, we're of different ethnic backgrounds. And we don't really agree on much except for fundamental values of kindness and generosity, and really being super progressive in that. But it's also for the fact that, we just know how to mutually respect each other, because even though we have differing opinions on a million things, it doesn't mean I don't love him. Right? And that demonstrates to me that when someone comes in my doors and they have a different political opinion than me, or they have a different stance on vaccination, or they come from a different, ethnic background than I do, I have something to learn from this person. And their behavior is a symptom of their perspective, context, their experiences. And if they're unkind and they're struggling,
I love that.
right,
I love
then I can be okay with that, because I can be empathetic towards their situation and their experience, but I don't have to let it affect me.
right. And like,
So,
how do you do that exactly? Sorry to cut you off. I feel like this
no,
is
it's all
an
good.
important point where, you this person, you have such opposing views on hot topics, like vaccinations and all that stuff. It's like there's a lot of debate around that, and people get into their feelings. How do you have a conversation with someone with like a totally opposite opinion on that, where you are able to maintain, so just do it with love. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, so have
Mm-hmm.
come from a place of love, where you can have the conversation, be okay with disagreeing, and without the judgment. How do you do it? Because like the judgment is like the big piece. We all are so into our own opinions.
Well, I mean, life's so busy, and the reality is that if I'm judging someone, then I'm being a jerk. Like, if I have an opinion and someone's judging me, then they're a jerk, right? But if I'm going to judge someone else with the same, it cuts both ways. I can't talk about it about, oh, well, I don't judge others, quote unquote, but then go ahead and judge them. That's really, it's hypocrisy, right? And because I have 3 sets of young eyes watching everything that I do, I'm actually accountable to the words that I speak and the actions that I have. And so when we do have friends that, we don't hang out anymore because, they have chosen to be unvaccinated as a family. It doesn't mean I don't care about them and I don't love them. It's the fact that the risk and the effects of that affecting my family could be devastating. And I stand very, very staunchly in my view of science. And someone might have a different scientific point of view, but I have to look at it just as that. There's no science, there's no emotional science. There's like, when it comes to opinions anyway. And you can have two opposing views. And as always, somewhere, somehow, I can be wrong. And I'm going to have to be okay with that no matter what the stances that I take. But somewhere between those two extremities is the right answer. But the right answer for me is always with kindness. When something comes from jealousy, envy, fear, I never make good decisions when I'm feeling those things. So, you know, judging someone certainly doesn't help the situation. So, doing all the finger wagging and making accusations and name calling, those are default behaviors that I prefer not to use. It's not that I don't fall into those traps. It's just that having that self-awareness of knowing how I'm feeling, and if I'm escalating, being able to emotionally like manage myself is so important. And in COVID, that has shown me everything. Like, I run a chocolate factory. Are there really chocolate emergencies? Like, if you didn't receive your order because you weren't home and we delivered it, and you're calling me and my company and you're upset and you're complaining, but we're going to go deliver it tomorrow, is it really devastating? Like, like, no one died. Like, I know you want your order and you've paid for it, and I get that. And we're going to do our very best to get it to you, but you weren't home. We even called you. We even let you know when we were going to come. We're doing our best. And so, judge away. We're doing our best, and that's good enough for me. And if I know that someone else is doing their best and making their best decisions based on what they understand, what they know, and what their family needs, they're going to make a different decision based on the information that's presented to them. But if they ask me specifically for information, like where would I go, or where would I read, or, on any of those topics, I'd be like, hey, let's talk. Like, what is your take on this? I'm always interested in someone's opposing point of view because I love challenging my beliefs. And at first, it was always, no, you're not my people. Here's the line, and you go stand over there. Now I'm like, tell me more. Like, what's going on with you, and why do you see that? Like, what has affected you? What research are you reading? What resources are you using? And if anything, it gives me more insight and even more empathy for where they're coming from.
Absolutely. That piece of open mindedness, to always be willing to be open minded and receive a different view. I think when we fall into the other traps, it's probably out of fear. We're just fearing, they might tell me something that will basically shake my whole beliefs. Everything I base my life and my identity on, that new belief that I might open my mind to might shake it all up. And then it's like, if you base your identity on some things, your beliefs, when you find out that actually what you base your whole life on is maybe a lie. Now imagine that shock. So I think we try to protect ourselves from that by just, pushing those things that we think, oh, that's completely untrue, or it's not part of my beliefs. So it's out there and I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to look at it. But for you, when you get to that moment, because I felt it, I feel it sometimes when you're that emotional feeling of envy or jealousy or judgment, when you feel it and you notice it within a conversation with somebody that you completely don't agree with on anything with, how do you bring yourself back to who you are before going full steam into that judgment and that, all that other stuff? When in that moment, what is your tip, your trick? What do you do?
I mean, I fall into that trap where I'm going for it. Like, it's like waving the red cape for the bull, right? Like, I fall into that trap a million times, and that's my default, right? Because I spent a lot of my life being forced to prove my argument, to reinforce my opinion with facts, science, numbers, all of those things. So that's my default. The irony of that is, like, if I can just say, like, if I can really just inhale really deeply and just say, what can I learn from this person? And how much empathy can I give them for their positioning? and what their thoughts are, so I can ensure that in my mind that what they're saying is valid for them. Um, that takes a lot of practice. And, for the first 100 times, I'd probably 99 times I didn't catch it, right? And then you go home from that place of self-awareness and you beat yourself up and feel guilt and shame about, oh man, like I was trying, and then I didn't regulate properly, and I went for it, and I fell into my own trap, or the trap that they're setting up, because they want to see you lose it.
Mhm.
So the question always to me is, to myself is, who do you want to be in this conversation? Do you want to be right, or do you want to have peace?
Amen.
Right? And I love to argue. I love debating. I love getting into those hot button issues. I find it really exciting, but sometimes you just got to lay down, what is it, what Jada Pinkett Smith says, you got to lay down your warrior and just find peace. Like, why do you need to fight about this? Like, take yourself out of the equation. You don't have to come in with, your sword swinging every single situation. You just don't. So realizing that not every conversation has to be an argument, and I don't have to be right in every single one, is beautiful. And even better is like, what if you let someone believe that they're right? Just to have peace. Well, I do that every day with my family, right? Like, I'm not going to sit there and argue with my 7-year-old because he's the same wiring. He loves to argue. But if I let him believe he's right for a moment, like, that's not the worst thing has ever happened to me, right? Not every molehill has to be a mountain, right?
Yes, I love that. I could not agree more with that. And I just want to like step back a little bit when you sort of were given the pink slip and you had to leave that engineering position. Was that a rock bottom for you? And what were the steps that you, if that was, or even if it wasn't, I'm assuming it was a hard place and you had to take specific steps to sort of come out of that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, like that was probably my rock bottom. It probably took 3 months for me to actually bottom out, because you have to go take your package. You have to go get it vetted by a lawyer. You have to really consider whether you're going to go, and you're going to sue the company if you believe that you're worth more than what they're offering you. There's all these things that you have to consider. And then on top of that, I have 3 kids in tow. I'm the only person who was salaried because my husband was at home while I was working full time. And so, there were just so many things to consider. And then on top of that, like, I was going through postpartum, identity crisis, financial crisis. It was rough because, the way that you live to a certain standard, and then you can't achieve that anymore. What does that mean for you? Or how do you identify with that? It's funny because once we decided we were going to go and open this, chocolate shop and, start out, it had probably been a year afterwards, not even a year, probably, 10 months. I listened to a Mel Robbins interview with Tom Bilyeu on impact theory. And that one interview changed everything about how I saw the world, because it was packaged in such a way that the words just resonated with me, and I could so relate to, Mel Robbins and laying in bed and not wanting to get up. And, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's me, right? And the questions that he was asking was so like intrinsic about, human nature and the psychology of people. And immediately it sent me into this wormhole. And if you do any level of research, it's like you read the first article and then it sends you down this, okay, what is this Tom Bilyeu person? Who is he? Who else has he interviewed? And then I backpedaled into, like, I think at that time, he had less than 10 interviews. And every single Tuesday, without fail, as he put forth a new interview, I was on it, like on Tuesday. And there was one thing, if I could only implement one thing until the next video came out, then I spent a week practicing something, anything, right? And so I got to figure out all the different pieces about how do Olympic athletes think? Elite athletes, how do they think? How would you gear up if you're going to run a marathon versus a gymnast versus Olympic snowboarder? I found that fascinating, because it was all about mindset and goal setting, and then how to achieve those goals. But then it was also the entrepreneurs, because they all have these transitional moments. But more than anything, I was experiencing so much anxiety because I had developed this need for self-awareness, and I didn't realize that my engineering mind and my background programmed me for catastrophic thinking. What are the factors of safety? How can this go sideways? How is this going to fail? The one thing that changed everything for me was somewhere around my second or third year, I was finding all the problems, complaining about all the problems. And then I realized that I didn't like the person who was talking to me inside my head. I'm like, why are you complaining? It's been 3 solid years of me bitching and moaning and complaining about the same shit over and over again. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Right? Because even I was tired of hearing myself complain. And then I realized that I could turn this into a superpower and flip my own script by saying, okay, these are all the problems. These are all the reasons why it's going to fail. So if I can correct all these problems, do I get a yes? How can I solve this? How can I work this to my advantage? And that became super satisfying. And it sent me on a different wormhole of like, okay, like I got to make all these corrections. But the last 18 months, it was probably around this year, around this time of year last year, I was lucky enough to get kind of, into the lives of the Q&As with Tom Bilyeu. And I got to, ask a question to Lisa, and I got to ask a question to Tom. And at one point he's like, there's something up with your narrative. I'm like, oh, he's right. It's not that he was wrong. He was totally right. And, because I was being sarcastic and I was trying to behave in such a way that, in the way that I thought he wanted to view me. I was trying to gain and please somebody else on the other side of a camera. And that was when I was just like, oh my gosh, who in the hell do I think I am? Because whoever that is, I don't want to be that. So when I started changing my mindset, changing my narrative, and being kind to myself, finding lots of grace, ditching the guilt and shame by actually like, no, I'm not going to feel bad about the fact that, I embarrassed myself in Tom Bilyeu by asking a question and being myself today. It doesn't matter because now I've got something that he gave me, some amazing, extraordinary feedback that I can implement. And over time, I can become the person I want to be. And so like, yeah, taking advice, taking criticism, accepting failure as a lesson and applying it right away is extraordinary. It's super powerful. But that self-soothing piece, damn, that took a long time. Yeah.
What were your practical steps of changing your narrative?
Yeah. So the first thing that I explored, it was through Tom. So I'm going to constantly, quote Tom on a lot of things.
It's
But,
Tom
he was,
for anybody who doesn't know.
yeah. So, his thing was that, there's the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. Like what is your loop? Like, what do you say to yourself when you're triggered? And that puts you in a flight or fight mode, right? But you really want to be in that rest digest mode where you're kind of chill. So, who do you want to be? Super high wired, anxious and full of fear? Or do you want to be like kind of relaxed and still being able to do things? So being able to make that transition turned into like, okay, tear away everything. What do I need to do to self-care so I can be in that rest and digest kind of situation all the time? That meant that I had to get my exercise on point. It meant that I had to start eating mindfully and that I had to get enough sleep. But the sleep piece was so foundational because I was, raising itty bitty people. And that wasn't a continuous and constant foundational piece yet. So, then it turned into like, okay, I got to sleep train my kids, like, and make sure everything's cool. And then it turned into, okay, I got to start exercising. Okay, how am I going to start? Well, I just have to start. I got to start moving my body. And then it became, okay, what am I going to eat? Right. And how does that affect my mood? How does that affect my behavior and the people around me? If I'm raging at 2 PM, it's like my kids are like, Mom, are you okay? It's like, the kindest way to ask is, hey, Mom, I've got a couple of snacks. Or, hey, do you want to have a nap? Like, those are the nicest ways to tell me that I'm not being the best version of myself. Right. And so with those three things, that started to change so that I could catch myself in those negative self-talks and the crappy narratives and that type of stuff, but catching yourself in that practice of like, you're feeling guilt and shame because you didn't do something, you didn't successfully catch something at a certain time, or you didn't pay something on time, or you have a laundry list of things and you only got the first 5 done, but you have 30. I'm just like, no, reframe this. Okay, I got 5 things done on that list and it's a miracle I got them done at all. I am happy with that. I am grateful that I have the opportunity to do 5. Tomorrow, can I do a 6th? Right? And the answer is always, yeah, I can do, that 6th, or I can do, whatever. But the whole point is like, then I knew, well, I can't do 30 things, or I don't want to do 30 things. It would be nice to do 30 things, but I can't do them all. Okay, can I span out those 30 things over 6 days? Well, yes, I can. I can do 5 plus 1 a day. And then it turned into about performance. Okay, if I'm sitting at my desk, I have to drop off the kids for 9 a.m. I've got till 3:30. How much work can I get done in 6.5 hours so I can be awesome at work and perform like a rock star? And when I'm home in front of my kids, I am the mom they deserve, right? I'm the mom that I never had. And can I do those 2 things? Because my priority is my family. How I prioritize my family is by being kick-ass at work. And so having those 2 levers all the time, pushing and pulling, instead of trying to drive both simultaneously as hard as I can, was a much better balance for me in my head that allowed me to have respite one from each other. So that when I was at work, I was focused at work and I wasn't whining in my head about, oh, I wish I was with the kids. Or being at home thinking about all the projects or all the things that I had to do at my office, just being present and just performing the way I needed to for that time was everything.
So going back to like the work piece, you mentioned being kick-ass at work. So usually with work, there's so many things to do, especially when you're running your own business. There's like a bunch of to-do lists. So within that 6-hour time frame that you have at work, how do you make sure that that six hour time frame is used to the fullest, to the maximum, to the best, where it's kick-ass? What is that for
Yeah.
you?
For me, it is prioritization, all the priorities. So when I fill my calendar with all the things, the first thing is my family first, right? So I need to know when the kids are off school. I need to know when I'm there for them. And so that takes up my calendar first. The second thing is, actually all the things I want to do for personal and professional development, I slot those in because I really want to have this interview with you today. I slotted you in, I blocked that time
Thank
off,
you.
and that's my time, right? And so I try to have at least 1 or 2 hours worth of that time during my business day, because that's what lights me up. That's what fills me up. It connects me to my community, and that's what's important to me. The rest of the time is free flow for communication, leading my teams, and administrative work. And because I'm the administrator for my entire company, the administrative work just never goes away. But it was really in the beginning about me creating a team, so I wasn't doing it all. So while I'm here having a conversation with you, I have 3 people working the retail floor in fulfillment as well as retail and dealing with the phones and customer service that I've trained. I've got standard operating procedures for, and they can support each other. I don't need to be there to supervise them because they're extraordinary at what they do, and they can be left with a lot of autonomy to have the agency to make the right decisions for themselves. So then I can do the things that I need to do, which is, sales, discussing marketing, entertaining clients that, that are high needs or high profile, and then ensuring that I support them properly by getting my teams ready and galvanized to, execute on orders, deliveries, contracts, those types of things. And so my process is continuously evolving, but it's really about ensuring that all the big things in my life that need time because they're imperative to my health and well-being and my family's health and well-being, they're all done. Then it would be, all the administrative, like, insurance law, all the compliance pieces, those next. And then the rest kind of takes care of itself. And if I miss something or I drop something, then I learn from that, right? Because, a bill goes, and oh, suddenly we don't have internet. Well, that's a problem. What are you going to do about it? Well, I better send myself a reminder, right? So those processes are ever evolving.
So it I'm like the word overwhelm is coming up with me. It's like so when you look at your calendar, do you ever think overwhelm, or do you
I
have it?
used to. So another Tom Bilyeu thing is last year around this time, I was like, overwhelm's coming because it's almost November, December. It's my season. And I always like practically crap myself because there are so many things to do. And he asked me, point blank and to my face, on the other side of the camera, he's like, well, do you have an event in your life where you say to yourself, you don't get overwhelmed? And I'm thinking to myself, well, Tom, I wouldn't have asked the question if I didn't think, if I had that event in my life. He's like, would you like me to tell you? I'm like, yeah, tell me more. Like, I'm eating it up. And he's just like, he says to himself, I don't get overwhelmed. And I'm just like, what does this mean? And what does this mean for me? And for him, the reason why he says that out loud is because there's always a million things you can do. But I'm one of those people who's really tightly wound, probably on spectrum in all of those ways, like, autism, probably, ADHD, probably, I've even got my diagnosis now. So I'm like, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I have children, so I can see a lot of those characteristics exhibit themselves in them and help them support them at school. But, clearly from a sensory standpoint, I can get overwhelmed and I do get overwhelmed. But how do you prevent yourself from bottoming out? What is your signs in your body that show you that you're doing too much or that you need to take your foot off of the accelerator and take care of yourself immediately? And Tom asked me, he's like, if I told you that if you just overwhelm is a 13 or 14-second state, and that if you can manage your way through that, you won't be overwhelmed anymore. And if I gave you the techniques and tricks to get through it, would you do it? I'm like, yeah, tell me more, right? And and so he's just like, that's when he started talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and where you're trying to go. And the reality is when you get overwhelmed, you shut down, right? When you have a tantrum or you cry or you get emotionally, you can't pull it together because you haven't slept well, you haven't exercised, you haven't eaten properly, and you've shuffled yourself to the bottom of the deck. Overwhelm comes very easily. So, that takes, do you have a meditation practice or do you have a practice where you can just calm down, right? What does that mean for you? In the beginning, it was like, I got to go home. It's 2 p.m. and I'm crapping myself. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to have a nap because it forces a reset. So that's a hard reset for me. But if I'm emotionally unregulated in front of my staff, that affects how they view me. And if I'm their leader and I can't lead them if I'm emotionally overwhelmed or if I'm not behaviorally at my best, so, I can't do this in front of them, right? So I had to, try a few things, right? I was like, okay, then, what can I do to support myself and my well-being? And then, I went down another wormhole of adaptogenic mushrooms or, hey, I'm using green tea today, or I'm using, lion's mane for focus or cordyceps for focus or chaga for overall gut health, or I need to relax. It's nighttime. I'm going to do reishi. No stimulants in the afternoon. These are the types of ways that I'm trying to support my body so that I can get the performance and so that I can prevent myself from getting overwhelmed. But I haven't had an overwhelm moment in over a year because I took what he said to heart and applied it properly and liberally. And always my adjustments and how I show up are changing because, as you know, when you have a fix for something, the problems get bigger, life gets bigger, and you get better only because you're adjusting your strategies based on the stressors, like your environment. So that's where I am currently with that overwhelm process.
Ooh, absolutely. I love that. Like I hear you mentioning having some sort of practice to get back to yourself, which is for you meditation and also using other tools in terms of like mushrooms or reishi and that kind of stuff. Now, which is for me to say that for anyone, you have to try a few things to see what actually works for you. We know sleep is always, it's like a universal thing. We all should make sure we get enough proper sleep and nutrition and all that stuff. But like for you, Was there a moment where you also had to change your story or your personal um, narrative when it came to the word overwhelm itself?
Yes, absolutely. And, screaming that I wasn't going to get overwhelmed was like, it was for me, my Seinfeld moment where George Costanza is screaming serenity now. And he's not serene in any capacity. It's like, I'm not getting overwhelmed. And like, I'm just like, okay, clearly this isn't working. That was my first attempt, right? But then it turned into like, no, I'm not going to get overwhelmed because why? Right. And Tom has a gratitude practice that forces him to go into a different style of feedback loop, which loops him in from all those negative thoughts into something positive. And so his explanation is usually like, I think about all the things I'm grateful for, and then I can't even remember what the trigger was. Right. And so, for me, it wasn't all the things that I was grateful for, but it was all the things that I was capable of. And because the overwhelm would come with the workload. I can't do it all. I'm like, well, you can do it all. You just can't do it all at once. So what are your first 5 things? Okay, I'm going to go do this, 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 and this. And usually, if I have 5, then if I do the top 3, that's 60%, and that's more than enough. And if I try it the 4th, well, then I tried. And if I fail, then I fail. But you don't know your capacity until you set up those rules, boundaries, limitations for yourself and get out the gate. And if you're usually landing at a 75, 85% kind of place, then you're really happy with yourself. But then you can kind of, adjust and measure, adjust and measure. And it took me over a year to realize like, oh yeah, I can handle all of that and then some, and I can still be happy doing it. And so I'm just, all the things that fall through the bottom. Do I have the right people around me to help me pick up all the pieces? Because, you're spinning all the plates, you're juggling all the chainsaws. Something's going to go sideways and something's going to go wrong. But if you have the right people around you and you've built teams, and, I can even turn to my kids and like, oh my gosh, like we just got home. It's 2 p.m. I didn't eat lunch and I'm not the best version of myself. Can you please help me find something for us all to eat? The kids are in the cupboards like, hey, Mom, what can I do about this? And how can you be sad, grumpy, or angry when someone's trying to help you and you've asked for it? As a woman, the most difficult thing for me as a woman and as a mother is asking for help, because that sense of reaching out to say like, I'm not capable is devastating, right? And then I can kind of, reframe it as like, it's not devastating. If anything, it's so strong to realize that you're not able to do it all at once. So why can't you ask for help from the people who love you the most? Because if someone asked me for any level of help, I would be there. I would be there because that's the type of person I am. So who am I raising and who am I surrounding myself with? They want to be there for me too. So now it's like, hey, these are the things that I need. Can I call on you for these things in advance? And usually people are really kind about doing that. So now that level of overwhelm isn't about the fact that I'm overwhelmed. Before, I was overwhelmed because I refused to delegate. I wasn't actually emptying the plate of things that I had to do because it was faster for me to get it done than get others to help me. But if I took the time and said, I don't have the capacity to do these things, my best time is spent for these priorities, and my team can have the rest of these things that don't fit in my priorities, then it gives them the opportunity to rise. And then it also gives me the opportunity to focus on what I need to have done. And then I can lead them properly. And that's exciting, right? And
That's
that's
beautiful.
peace. And it's
Yeah,
peace. It's not being right. It's just finding peace.
absolutely. I want to just like hone in on something, which is like asking for help. I've I've been there where it's like it's really hard for me to ask for help. And I think it's a lot of women know that piece of, always being the caregiver and giving, but not quite being able to ask for help. Do you remember the first time where you decided, I need help and I'm going to ask for help? How did you get past that discomfort and the fear of asking for help and actually doing it?
And this is the thing, what I'm learning is that I always have those feelings and I feel them really deeply. And
Yeah.
before, it would stop me from asking. Now I'm realizing that courage, bravery, and wisdom is having all those feelings and going for it anyway, right? and it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't stop being uncomfortable for me. It just, oh, I've had this feeling a million times, and I'm going to ask too, right? And it's okay to ask, because as soon as I do ask, all those neurotic thoughts that I had about me asking fade away, because then it either proves or disproves those assumptions. But then you realize those assumptions are limiting beliefs and you shouldn't have them to begin with. Don't have any expectations. Just ask for the help. And if someone says no, it's not going to destroy you, and it has no reflection on you. It has every reflection on what they're capable of delivering, right?
Exactly. That's
So,
the thing. I think it comes from a fear of rejection. Every time we're like holding ourselves back from asking for help or even asking for anything, like it's just fear of rejection and probably a level of low self-worth in there. But it's the more we do it, the more we put ourselves in that position, we're able to overcome it. And like you say, that discomfort or that fear is probably not going to go away, but I think the more you put yourself in that position and intentionally doing it, it lessens.
well, I akin it a lot to public speaking, because, like, when I do public speaking, I can feel my heart race, and, it's different in front of a crowd, and you see all the people and the eyes in the audience. And, my husband is a professional musician on top of all these things, and he doesn't have those fears. He just goes out there, knocks it out of the park, and rocks it every single time. And I'm just like, okay, like, for a long time, I would just sit there just totally envious that he has this skill. But it was literally, it was practice from a very young age, because his mom was a music teacher. So he had those introductions early on. For me, as a woman in my 40s, trying to introduce these, grand sweeping concepts, like, there's a lot of hesitancy and a lot of pushback and a lot of limiting beliefs and conditioning that I have to kind of work through in order to show up and play at a level that matches the company I'm trying to build. And it takes time, because the first few times you get in front of a client and you're being kind of salesy, it's uncomfortable and weird, because you feel uncomfortable and weird, and they can sense that you're uncomfortable and weird, and you don't get it. You don't get the deal. But then what happens is you practice and you practice and you practice, and then you're awkward in front of someone, but you're authentically you awkward, but they don't think you're awkward because they're awkward too. Then it just kind of works out. The best part is when you find that piece of just being who you are, and you're really comfortable about it, and you're expressing whatever it is, and you're engaging in conversation, you're nurturing relationships instead of selling something. That particular fashion of interchanging ideas and concepts, it works much better for me in sales, because I really feel uncomfortable like doing a hard pitch. It's not my style. And I feel really uncomfortable using my network. And hey, I'm selling stuff. Like, you never find me on my Facebook page or my LinkedIn saying,
I
like,
noticed that. I was looking for your profile when I was researching. I was like, she is not even. I can't find you on LinkedIn. I'm like, where is she?
right. And the reason why is because I'm building a company that's based on product. And we're building a brand that's actually, regardless of Dallas and I, certainly we are the people behind my company, but it's a brand. And it takes a team behind the brand. So it's not just me. It's not just Dallas. It's not Dallas and I together. It's an entire team of people, a very small, tiny, mighty team of people, but it's all of us. And people are really, like, really thinking that it's kind of crazy. But my thing is that our product is so good that it doesn't matter who's selling it. It's easy to sell our product because it's extraordinary. It's won tons of awards, et cetera, et cetera. The packaging looks slick. We have a great team behind us. But I don't need to ask my mom's friend to buy my stuff so that I can feed my children. That's not where I was ever going with this product. And that's not who I am. That doesn't feel genuine or authentic. A lot of people feel very comfortable doing that because that's their style and that's who they authentically are. And I'm not shaming them or guilting them. I know I'm this way, and I have to behave in a way that's authentic to myself until I'm proven otherwise. But yeah, that kind of suits me best. And I don't think that the manipulation of the people that I care about serves me, because I don't want to be, oh, here comes Eva. She's going to try and sell me something. She's going to try and sell me her, chocolate. I just don't want that to ever be awkward. I never want it to be a thing. But, I'll tell you all about my kids, and I'll tell you all about, the new products that are coming out, or, hey, I got this new packaging, check this out, or, these new flavors are happening. Like, we'll talk about those things, but there's never a hard sell when you talk to me. And so that just works for us. And then, one of the other things that's really important, especially through COVID, is we're realizing, like, how many emails do you get asking you for your services? You get a lot of them, even when you're beginning, even when you're, small, even when people don't think you're small and they think you're really big, like all these donation asks, requests for various things come in. Now we've just kind of come to the realization that, we're not here for like a one-time transaction and done. We're trying to build a community, and we're trying to build relationships with all of our clients, even if they're internet e-commerce clients. And so, the first few people who would come in the doors, they still buy from us, right? Because we have an extraordinary product, and we're always kind and friendly. And we hire young, eager staff to ensure that their needs are met. And in this time, service is everything, because you don't see a lot of people. There's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear that's happening in the world. So if you can get someone what they need and do it with kindness, then they're going to come back. So it's exciting to kind of build something that's really specifically about the relationships you build.
Yeah, and I love you mentioning like that authenticity and doing something that's authentic to you. And I just want to like remind people that it's not always something that we pick up. It's already in us, but we kind of somehow lose it with the programming. So it's going to take time to get back to who you are innately. It's like you get first, you realize that, wait, I'm not even being myself. Then you start to find out who the hell am I in the first place. And then you start uncovering all those layers. And gradually, who you truly are will start to show up. But we have to remember that it's a process. We're not gonna wake up, because for me anyway, I wasn't waking up one day and was like, oh, I am this. This is authentically me. I had no fucking clue whether I liked pink or purple. So it took
That's
me.
exactly right. um, yeah, like my whole thing was like, what's it going to take to, run a business? How many years is it going to take before I have profit? Like, I had no idea, because that's not my jam. Like, I'm not a finance person, but I was, thrust into wear all the hats, and they're all ill-fitting, and they're all ugly as shit, but you got to wear them as if they're your own, right? And it's not until you actually look back and like, okay, this is where I am today. And it's usually like, when the Facebook memories start coming up, because I'm of a vintage where Facebook, a lot of my friends are on Facebook. Then you realize, like, so what was my mindset like then? Like, what was my life like then? Like, 8 years ago, your child was doing this and you only had 2 kids at the time. I'm like, oh yeah, that was so simple. Like, times were so simple. And I loved who I was and who I was becoming. But look how far I've come since then. Look at all the things that have happened. Look at all these milestones. And then you look back and you have perspective, and you're like, I've grown XYZ amount, and I can measure it because I do these things. And this is how many times, or, this is how long it took for my narrative to change. Or I saw the change in my business because when I changed my narrative, then all of a sudden my sales went up. Or I'm so much more connected with my children this year than last year because I became the woman and the leader that I needed to be to connect with them at a different level. And if you don't put those little tiny pieces in and make the adjustments, you're exactly who you are today. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm glad for everyone who's exactly who they are today. But in 5 years from now, if you make no adjustments, you make no improvements, you've capped out your potential, right? And if you're modeling behaviors for children, you just want them to live up to their potential. But if you're not actually striving for anything, then you can't show them what can be done.
That's so very true. I love that. And before we close it off, I want to ask one more question, which is, you mentioned anxiety. Um, like, can you walk us through a moment where you were feeling it and how you recognized it or acknowledged it and moved yourself out of that moment or state of anxiety? Because it's such a thing that I feel like a lot of people deal with, which is anxiety. Whenever you felt it, how did you move through it?
Well, let me tell you what anxiety and neuroses feels like for me and what I kind of label it as. So if you're a thinker, like, and your mind is going, so fast. Like sometimes you can hold five conversations in your head simultaneously. Like I'm one of those people. But when something happens, when I'm emotionally not well, I can't regulate, I start obsessing about conversations or things that happened in the past, whether it was earlier in the day, a week, a month, years, decades prior. And I'm always looking for the thing that I would change and if the outcome would be different. So that's called my neurotic thinking. That's neurosis. You're trying to change the past and you can't.
Okay.
Anxiety is when you're trying to predict the future and you're trying to change the situation, like a choose your own adventure book from the 80s, so that, okay, if I go to this chapter and I make this choice, what would the outcome be? And again, you can't control that because that's in the future. There's nothing wrong with that type of thinking until it starts affecting your behaviors. It starts sucking up all your time. You're laying awake at night and the hamster's going in your head and it's keeping you up. That's when I say anxiety is too much, right? It's affecting your well-being and it's affecting your behavior. And so I would have all these neurotic and anxiety-based behaviors and thinking that I just thought was me. The reality is it's you until you realize that the behavior is a symptom of something, right? And so where is this coming from and how can you reframe that? And so really just the voice of myself saying, that is outside of your control. Therefore, you should offer it very little energy. Turn the tap off on that. Turn the volume down on that because this is not serving you. The outcome of like the 101 outcomes that I'm dreaming up, if this person says this thing or that thing or an alternative to that or ABC and a combination of A, B, and C, like what does that matter? At the end, there's only one answer. And how you prepare for that isn't by anxious thinking. It's by listening and ensuring that you have the answer that is authentic to you at that time. But
How
that
do you
takes
find that
practice.
authentic answer?
It changes over time because the way I would answer a question a decade ago is different than the way I would answer it now. I'm not the same person, right, than I was a decade ago because, at that point I just had one child. I hadn't had a business. I hadn't, I was still in the career that I was in and I felt some kind of way about myself then. I still had limiting beliefs, but they were different. And now that I've got a little bit more capacity of really more compassion, empathy for myself and for others, I can just usually step away from those types of things by not allowing myself to go there, right? I don't grind away the time any longer because my sleep is so foundational and fundamental. It's like, nope, shut it down. I'm not going to think about it anymore. But it took a long time. I was like, okay, I can't think about it anymore, and I'm still going. Right? I'm still blinking away in the dark, right? Still thinking about the thing I'm not supposed to be thinking about, right? But it takes practice, right? And then you start, okay, what's the distraction? Like, what can I think about, right? And then, it's these feedback loops that we get ourselves into, right? So it's like, okay, then I'll pull out the Tom Bilyeu example. Okay, what am I grateful for? It's 4 a.m. I haven't had a week of sleep and I've got to be up in 2 hours, but I'm going to make it the best 2 hours. So I'm going to be grateful for what? And I'll go through the exercise of, okay, then why did I have to go through this exercise? Right? If you're lucky, you'll pass out, right? At 4 a.m. Or, it's 5 a.m. and I'm still not there. But that's the process. You have to figure out what works for you. And then whatever that one tool that works, next thing you know, like it's working for a really good long time. You're like, yeah, I found the answer. And then the stressors get bigger and you're also better. But then you have to implement a different tool or you have to use the same tool in a different kind of way and I actually have to kind of gamify it. It's like, okay, I tried that. Well, that didn't work. So what combination of tools am I going to use? Or I'm going to call, or, I'm going to FaceTime with, RM. And I'm going to ask her what she would do in this situation. And sometimes having that other voice, some other calming, grounding force that's not my own, is enough to just totally put me right back in the lane where I'm supposed to be. Because It's the people that you surround yourself with. It's the support. It's the self-awareness, but on top of that, the self-compassion and the self-care that goes into this that will determine your results and how quickly you get them. And
Absolutely.
so until those systems are in place, it's a long game. But
Yeah.
life is long and life is beautiful. And if it takes years to accomplish something, then it was worth doing.
Absolutely. And that's the beautiful process that you nailed it. Like it's a great way to think of it as a process. It's all a process and you are exactly where you're supposed to be in this moment. But just keep moving, taking one step at a time. And you mentioned gamifying it. I think that is so spot on. Like I love the idea of gamifying things, of like basically having fun with it. Have fun with the process. Things will come up, the discomfort, be like, oh, okay, I noticed this is discomfort. I get you. We're all pals. What are we doing today? Like kind of make it fun that way. I feel like that lightheartedness makes it feel less heavy when you're able to really just bring a little bit of fun into whatever it is that's making you feel that discomfort. Just bring that fun and a lightheartedness into it. It makes it feel better. And
Yeah,
thank you
and
so
and
much.
if you're oh, you're so welcome. Sorry, I know that we're trying to
I,
wrap
I
this up,
have
so I
one
won't go
last
on.
question. I know, but
Sure.
and it's like you have boys, and you mentioning all your story and how you grew up and how you were able to just sort of move away from the programming and find who you are. How do you make sure you don't fall into the trap of the mom who always wants the best for her kids, but also want to be careful to not use what you think is your best as pushing it down on your own kids? Guide them, but not necessarily push all of your stuff on them. How do you balance that?
It's hard. And as much as I'm transitioning and being myself and transitioning as a leader in business, I'm also transitioning and being a leader in my own home. And so at first I brought all that baggage with me. This is how I grew up. And so this is the same stick I'm going to rule you with guys with. And clearly that wasn't working. But it's also for the fact that, my mother is, a strong, extraordinary woman with all these extraordinary flaws, all these amazing strengths, all these extraordinary vulnerabilities. And we started building a relationship on the present instead of the past. And so, I try to wipe away the past, not from the sense of throwing the past in their face to say, hey, well, you did this for the last, you always do that. Like I try not to use that type of language. But what it demonstrates to me is I'm thinking about patterns of behavior. So if you've done something in the past and this has historically been a pattern, I recognize that and I want to apply that today in our discussion because I would like to see a change in that, right? Because if you continue to do these things, that's going to be part of your narrative and these are going to be your default behaviors and your default choices. I wasn't blessed with daughters, right? Like I have 3 sons, and so I've committed myself not to raising just 3 boys, but raising extraordinary men that are worthy of strong and extraordinary women. That in itself is a pretty tall order, but if I do that, then my work is done, right? And that means that I have led myself in a life and a light that allows them to be their best so that they can handle extraordinary and strong women. And it really starts with the growth mindset early on and encouraging them to think for themselves and trying my very best not to reach in and solve their problems. For me, that is so hard because I'm like, oh, I'll just fix it. And then I have a 7-year-old who has a very different personality than my eldest two. He's very argumentative and loves to debate, has opinions everywhere, and is very, very masterful at manipulating a situation in his favor. And the other day he asked me, Mom, can I have, XYZ? I was like, oh, well, what are we going to do here? Like, you can choose to earn it, or, or we can find a different way for you to get it. And he's like, well, why can't you just buy it for me? I was like, well, I can buy it for you. I earn a salary, right? Like, I pay myself XYZ amount of dollars, but you're not old enough to be working. I mean, I can give you an allowance or you can do tasks at home, but you can earn your way to those things. And forcing them, as all kids, to earn their way to purchase things or get rewards and gamifying it, especially with young men, is everything, right? Like you have to make it fun. You have to make it worthwhile. You have to demonstrate that, but in my previous upbringing, nothing was fun. Everything was serious. Everything was so disciplined all the time. And then I realized, like, I'm a woman who doesn't have fun. I don't smile. I don't laugh because everything's so serious and buttoned down. And that's my history. I'm like, but do I have to be that person now? No, I don't. And so that usually keeps me from doing all the work for them because it's so easy to do. But the thing is, compared to my 12-year-old, I mean, like I've got 34 years on him. Yeah, I can do your homework for you, but why would I want to? Like he's got to go through the effort of trying and not trying and then getting the crappy mark and making the adjustment, and that's on him. Like my parents were so busy working that I never had that support anyway. So that's why I'm really effective at doing things, and I'm terrified for asking for help because it was never offered to me when I was young. So now it's like when you're in trouble, you got to raise the white flag and you say, I need some help here. And how to make that adjustment. So I'm trying to model the behavior. And then on top of that, I'm trying to allow them to have their own losses because everything can't be a win. But what do you learn from that? I have a 12-year-old right now and he's struggling in school because he's in a new French immersion school. He's the only kid from his primary school and he's lonely, but it's a pandemic. So if he's going to partner with someone or be friends with someone, it's like, well, all the school partnerships have already been made. He feels like the odd kid, and my heart breaks because I was exactly that kid, although way more awkward than him, no friends, and, lonely, really, really lonely. But, it's like every day there's a pep talk, every day there's a conversation. And now I'm coaching him through the feelings. And I'm not fixing anything for him. I'm not having the conversations with the teachers to tell them how to handle him. I'm telling him I'm telling the teachers what strategies I use to lead him and that what would get his performance. And don't ask him first. Maybe ask him third or fourth. Maybe give him the heads up that you're going to ask him because he's going to panic if you call on him unaware. And maybe partner him up with a bookish little girl because he's feeling pretty awkward right now, and he's tall and floppy and 12, so he's got that preteen thing going. But really just these are the things about him that I know that would help him, and that has served me well.
Yeah, I love that piece of guidance without going there and walking the journey for him or trying to fix things for him. That's big because I'm not a mom, but I just assume as a mom when you see your child struggling, you want to go in there and fix it for them, but it's just like you're holding yourself back, still being there, holding space, but sort of letting them walk it themselves because that's how they learn. That's how we all learn. Some of us learn the hardest way, but you know we have to start somewhere.
Exactly, exactly.
So I want you to please, before we close it off, tell us a little bit about the chocolate lab and how where people can find you if they want to get some chocolate of some. I
Yeah.
am should be getting some of those because I've been looking at the pictures as I was researching. I'm swooning over. I was like, oh my god, this looks so good.
So the Chocolate Lab, so chocolatelab.ca. We're currently only shipping to Canada, but I've actually been vetting a bunch of service providers that I can actually deliver to the US. So that's coming. It'll probably not be until the new year, but we wanted to ramp it up and test it before we get things going, and it's only just begun. Um, you can find us on Instagram. That's the_chocolate lab. And on TikTok, we're, I think it's Dali Wonka. So that's my husband. That's his personal chocolate brand that he's kind of, working on in his personality that kind of shows all the behind the scenes stuff. My whole thing is actually, sadly, my presence on LinkedIn is very, very small. And, most people actually interface with us on Instagram or, on our website. Um, yeah, it's just been a crazy wild ride, and like I'm loving who I'm becoming, and I love the fact that the direction and the culture of the company is just so like it really speaks to me, and it's really speaking to, you know, the young people that we employ. So it's exciting and good times.
Well, congratulations for all of that work that you've been doing, and it's paying off, and you keep going, and you know it's in alignment with who you are. That is like the best place to be. So it's amazing. And thank you. I really want to thank you for being here. This was an awesome conversation. I feel like we could have gone even, longer, but out of respect for your time, I just want to say thank you, Queen. It's been amazing chatting up with you. And thank
Thank
you.
you so much for your time. It was really a pleasure speaking with you, and it's never often enough, and it's never long enough, and I can't wait to do it again.
Yes, this was fun. This was so fun. So
All
thank you.
right, take care
And
of
thank
you.
you everyone else for watching. Bye.